here at the Sunday Feast class here at Shusharada Gopinath Mandir. Today the topic of class will be discovering the self. So today, in the process of discussing this, the concept of discovering the self, I'll be covering five main areas. And firstly, we'll be covering the area of why life is an art of balancing on a razor's edge. Secondly, I'll be covering the identity crisis of being human. Thirdly, I'll be covering the concept of relationship with the self and with the Lord. Fourthly, I'll be covering the concept of serving the self. And lastly, I'll be covering the idea of our identity being revealed. So all of these will unfold as we discuss today in this discourse. But firstly, I'll start with the concept of sharp implements in the Shastra, in the scriptures. There are countless references to sharp instruments, so knives, razor's edge, plows, plowshares, which also include a sharp implement. And, it's, I guess, the potency and the sort of penetrative ability of a sharp implement is recognised in the Shastra, and hence it's used as an analogy for many different things. So in the third canto, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya in the Hare Krishna movement, tells us that the path of spiritual life, in the purport, he talks that the path of spiritual life is stated in the Vedas to be like the edge of a sharpened razor. And a little inattentiveness may at once create havoc and bloodshed. But one who is completely surrendered soul, always seeking the protection of the Lord in the discharge of his entrusted duties, has no fear of falling into material contamination. So here we see that the razor's edge is likened to the material energy. So the material energy in itself is so dangerous. It's referred to as Maya in the Vedas, in the Shastra, is so dangerous that, if it's like walking on a razor's edge. So if you slip or if you make a wrong move, or if that razor is in the hands of the wrong person, then there's havoc and bloodshed. And it's like, we may have heard that description of, a knife, for example, a sharp implement being in the hands of, a criminal, for example, who might use it for criminal activities like even murder or something very sinister and dark such as that. But at the same time, that very same knife or a sharp implement in the hands of a surgeon actually can cure people and actually create much better health for that person. So, and this is like, when we speak of devotees, devotees who have actually turned their faces to the Lord, to acknowledge their relationship with the Lord, then they become sanctuaries from Maya, from that razor's edge, because the devotees themselves have their very own sharp implements by which to battle the razor of Maya. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So, it's kind of a little bit of a conundrum. Why is life, the spiritual path, why is it a razor's edge? Why is it balancing on a razor's edge? Why can't it be like dancing on a rainbow or, something like that, walking on a golden path? No, it's like balancing on a razor's edge. And the reason for this, the reason it's so treacherous is because of partly our identities. So we are what's known as the marginal energy of the Lord. The Lord having three principal energies by which he enacts his pastimes and his various activities and all the things that the Lord executes by his own will is done through these three energies. So one of them is the marginal energy, and we fall into that category, also known as the Tatastha Shakti. And the other two energies, the one is the external energy, which is also known as Maya, or the material energy, and the third energy is his internal energy, which is the pure spiritual potency. So until the balance of the scales is tipped in our lives towards fully being influenced by the spiritual energy, that third energy, the internal energy of the Lord, then inevitably we're going to be at some level influenced by the external energy, the other energy, to varying degrees. And of course, the more we're influenced by that external energy, the more havoc and bloodshed is created. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord himself, Lord Sri Krishna, says, Devi yasha gunamaye mama maya duratyaya mameva ye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. He describes that this divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. So there he's referring to the external energy, the material energy. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So here he's giving the problem and the solution in one verse. So the problem is that, yes, there is this razor's edge that can shed blood if you're not careful. But the way to get over it is actually to come to me, to put your faith in me, to surrender to me. And, there are symptoms of the scales being tipped in either direction. So the symptoms of the scales being tipped on the side of the external energy, us being influenced by the external energy, are things such as misery, despair, lamentation, anger, lust, greed, so many vices, so many negative emotions. And then similarly, there are symptoms by being influenced by the internal energy. And usually the more and more we're influenced by the internal energy, we become blissful and our relationships become harmonious, and we actually just experience life as a very fluent and harmonious experience. So what happens is when we experience life as distress or problematic or, so many relationship difficulties, that's what's happening is actually we're identifying falsely with that external energy. We actually think, this is my energy, I'm part of this energy, and, this is actually who I am. But that's actually inaccurate, and we'll see why. So what's happening is these experiences, these identifications with the material energy in so many different ways. It's actually reflected in the way we invest our time, in what we do, in what we think, what we believe, our thoughts, our actions. So many things reflect where we really place the value, the values and our values, and also our identity, whether it's more along the lines of identifying with the external or the internal energy. So that loss of identity is actually a cause of part of our frustration of being, just met with countless obstacles day after day after day, so many problems. And, we don't, the problem is we don't really know who we are, and that's why we come into difficulty. We just don't know who we are. We don't know what we need. We don't know what we want. We don't know what's best for us. We don't understand what is self-interest. And Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, he often speaks of, he would observe the passers-by, the commuters on the street, and he would lament. He would be very sorrowful because he would acknowledge that these people walking by, they don't understand what is their self-interest, what is actually going to make them happy. And what, our cultivating our relationship with the Lord, with Krishna, through service, it's an open secret. When we serve the Lord in whatever capacity we can, through the 9 arms of devotional service, which actually start off by hearing about the glories of the Lord, and then also chanting his glories, so chanting his holy name. What happens is, when we actually engage in these activities and we're serving the Lord, the open secret is that it's the same as serving the self. So the benefit that the Lord gains from having our association is equally our benefit, because it's a reciprocal exchange, it's a relationship. And ultimately it's a win-win situation. Everyone wins. And which is in stark contrast with our experiences sometimes in the material energy, or perhaps before we even came to, come to know of the temple, come to know of the devotees, or, in our past life, in our previous life, where we didn't have that exposure or experience. We may have experienced that, often there were so many situations that were lose-lose situations. There was no benefit for anyone. And often, there are so many dilemmas and conundrums and, so many difficulties. But ultimately, when one comes to serve Krishna, even what appears to be a difficulty is no longer a difficulty. And, again, we have to consider, when we have that loss of identity, when we identify with the material nature, it's very difficult to have a relationship with someone who doesn't know who they are. It's impossible, actually, to have a relationship with someone who doesn't know who they are, because there can't be that reciprocation. It can't be an authentic exchange. And we see, in so many ways, relationships with, full of conflict, abuse, trauma, drama, all of that. It's based on the fact that the individuals involved who are invested in the relationships, they don't actually understand their true identity. And it's like, if you consider, the colloquial term for as a madman in our society, someone who has taken leave of their senses, who doesn't really understand who they are. They're suffering from some distress, some mental illness, and so they've lost the connection with even their material identity, let alone their spiritual identity. So sometimes these unfortunate people, they need to be actually contained in special locked areas where they won't do harm to themselves or others, because they have no concept of who they are anymore. So can you imagine having a relationship with someone like that? You can't. There's no way, because that person, as much as you might be, totally in touch with who you are and absolutely connected with your own self, that person who's completely taken leave of their senses has no ability to reciprocate, has no ability to understand who they are. So don't freak out. I'm going to tell you, we are just like that madman. We are mad men and women, all of us. And the reason being, we may not be clinically, in the material sense, mad, as the example I gave. We may not be in that sense mad, but we are mad in the sense that finding ourselves here on this material plane, in this material environment, is actually an indication of our madness. And the madness is more that we have purposefully disconnected ourselves from the source of our life, of our spiritual identity. We have disconnected ourselves. So the madness, the definition of madness, comes from the fact that we have lost the concept of what is in our best self-interest. We don't know who it is we are, so we don't know what we need, what we want. We've lost it. So in that way, we are asked by Srila Prabhupada, who has so mercifully come to the West at and also, of course, he had so much influence in India as well. He has brought to us the medicine. He has brought to us the holy name, which, as an emissary of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who who revealed the secrets of the holy name to us, not very long ago. Srila Prabhupada has come and actually spread that jewel, that gold, to all of us to be able to take advantage of. And what we're being asked is to just take the medicine, calm down, and engage in relationship with the Lord. Because the thing is, without this medicine, it's just like a madman, a clinically diagnosed madman. They need medicine because really without it, there's havoc and bloodshed. But really what we're being asked to do is we also need medicine because without it, we can't function, we can't operate on a normal platform. So we're asked to take the medicine, calm down, and then we can have the relationship and we can start engaging, with the Lord. And it's the thing is, it's through our relationship with Krishna, which is how we discover ourselves. So the better we know Krishna, the better we know ourselves. It goes hand in hand. It's a symbiosis. It's a kind of reciprocal, natural exchange and relationship. Because after all, we are fragmental parts of the Lord. So we share many of the qualities of God. I mean, we are, in our essence, in our true identities, we are godly. We actually have those qualities that in part, we have those qualities that make the Lord the Lord. So you can imagine that when we understand, we understand the personality of the source of that life, that spiritual identity, then of course we understand who we are as spiritual beings as well. Now, Kadamba, His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Maharaj was recently here in Sydney, and he was speaking of the concept of abhideya, which is the process of cultivating that relationship. So, of course, abhideya is preceded by sambandha, which is establishing the relationship, and then after that, after abhideya, comes prayojana, which is reaching the actual goal of that relationship, which is the love, pure love of the Lord. So abhideya is the middle process, and it's where we cultivate that relationship. And actually we have our very own Abhideya Devi Dasi, who was initiated at that ceremony and previously known as Bhaktin Alice. So that's a very beautiful name she's been given. And the ultimate cure for our frustrations, the frustrations the material energy presents to us, and the way to meet all our needs, all those material needs we just can't get a hold of, and all the spiritual need, the ultimate spiritual food we need, that comes when we establish that relationship, when we cultivate that relationship. Now, in the material sense, most of society is completely misguided as to what constitutes serving the self. And Srila Prabhupada, he actually very beautifully, it's quite funny really, the way he described, in the 60s, many people would smoke. Of course, many people still smoke now, but there's greater awareness of, the perils of smoking, such as lung cancer and things. But in the 60s, it was very common. Everyone smoked. And also doctors. I know doctors would prescribe smoking to their patients for various reasons because, of the apparent benefits that they thought it had at the time. And actually there was a brand of cigarette that was called Kool. So it was Kool, Kool. And Srila Prabhupada made a comment that, these people are smoking fire to be cool, and it just made no sense to him. And of course, it actually doesn't make any sense. And also, recently I saw on a billboard an advertisement for whiskey, big billboard. There's an advertisement for whiskey, and the caption next to the bottle of whiskey was that this whiskey has been aged for greater character. And immediately it struck me, I thought, that is, I mean, what an oxymoron, because while the whiskey is getting greater character while it's being aged, the person consuming the whiskey is, their character is actually going through the floor, as they drink it. So, we sort of fooled, we sort of led to believe that, all these things are good for us, or that they'll enhance our lives, or that we need them, and that without them we just won't function properly. So we just misguided at every turn about what is good for us. And even on a more refined level for devotees of the Lord, even if we're not smoking and drinking, which hopefully we're not as devotees, but we might engage in activities that aren't specifically meant to be dovetailed exactly with service to the Lord, and we think that, oh look, no one will know, or it's just today, or Krishna is okay with it. But ultimately we're only fooling ourselves. Krishna can't be fooled. So if we really want to get out of the clutches of Maya and remove ourselves from that dangerous razor's edge, then of course, commitments need to be made, and we need to engage in that process wholeheartedly to protect ourselves. Really, ultimately, it's the ultimate self-serving act is to serve the Lord. The thing is also the devotees, what, those who acknowledge the Lord as the Supreme Personality of Godhead have over those materialists whose only experience is dabbling with that razor's edge, is knowledge. So devotees have knowledge, and Krishna himself tells us in Bhagavad Gita, Raja Vidya Raja Guyam. So this knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. And then he goes on to say that is prachakshavangamam, which is that the knowledge is experiential. It's like gyan and vigyan, knowledge and realized knowledge. So the knowledge is actually perceived directly. It's an experience rather than a sort of book kind of knowledge. It's something that's directly experienced through the process of devotional service. And we are so fortunate in that we have the tools by which to implement the knowledge that we receive from the Shastra. We have the holy names, again, which were given to us by originally Mahaprabhu and now Srila Prabhupada more recently. And this tool, this holy name, the Mahamantra of the Lord, is sharper than any razor. It's sharper than any razor. It's like a sharp knife that can cut through the bonds of any knots of material existence that may be there, that may conceal that sharpened razor. So there's no competition, really, between the sharpened implements. And again, Srila Prabhupada, in so many, in countless references, he refers to the holy name as medicine. So all throughout his interactions with his disciples, he speaks of the holy name as medicine. And so this medicine is what we want to dose up on. We want to dose up on the medicine. We don't want to dose up on the tobacco, the alcohol, the heroin, or whatever your preference. We don't want to dose up on that. We want to dose up on the holy name. In fact, we want an intravenous infusion of the holy name. And the thing is, with most medicine, it usually comes with an instruction. So there's a prescription. So, 2 tablets 3 times a day, whatever. And usually you have to stick to that instruction. Otherwise, if you take more or less, there'll be adverse effects. But the beauty about the holy name is that it's dose dependent, in a sense that the more you have, the better it is for you. So you can't have too much. There is no concept of overdose of the holy name. In fact, overdosing is actually very beneficial. And, when a doctor describes or prescribes a medication, if the doctor is worthwhile, they will also tell the patient, what the potential side effects of the medicine are. So, side effects, of course, they need to be known so that the patient has an informed understanding of what they're taking. And, the holy name also has its side effects. But luckily for us, the side effects are only positive. And one of the key side effects of chanting the holy name, as Lord Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita, and we hear so often in the Srimad Bhagavatam, is the discovery of the self. It's like a side effect. It's like an added bonus benefit to the chanting of the holy name. And again in Bhagavad Gita, in a purport in chapter 2, Srila Prabhupada says, the satisfaction in the self as a devotee of the Lord comes when our material desires subside due to engagement in devotional service. So we can see that the more we engage in devotional service, in service to the Lord, the material desires, they actually pale into insignificance. So they no longer have a hold on us. They no longer have relevance. And then what happens is, an additional effect is that we come to understand that, not having those material desires have a hold of us is actually our normal state. It is actually our normal state. It is a natural state of being. And so those days, those experiences we've had when we were just so attached to so many material things, or we had the desires that could never be fulfilled, we realize that actually that state is abnormal. So it's like, the madman analogy, it's madness. And then as we come to be purified through the process of devotional service, we appreciate what is normality and what is abnormality, and we come to understand that where we are here in this material energy is actually prison. It's a prison. It's actually a reformatory institution where we need reformation. It's not a playground, as we like to think sometimes. It is actually, it's a place of reform. So that becomes evident to us as well. And, so the more we engage in devotional service, the more our material desires subside. But it's not the opposite. So sometimes we think, I'll just do this. I'll earn my first million. I'll put all my kids through school. I'll, just get that house, that car. And then when I'm older, when I have time, I will engage in devotional service. So we know that every moment, that is a weak argument, because every moment in this material energy is actually taking us backwards. It's like travelling backwards in spiritual time, although spiritually, we know that the spiritual world is timeless. But in terms of progress, our spiritual progress, we're going backwards. Every moment we spend here without knowing our true identities, without engaging in the proper processes, is not only a waste, but it's actually working against us. So it's in our best interests to take this up seriously and not languish anymore in this lose-lose situation of the spiritual of the material energy. And again, this is a very beautiful, actually, very beautifully put in a purport. It's a verse in Canto 3 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll just read it to you, and it's just very beautiful. By discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. Svemahimni sthitasya cha. So the living entity stands in his own glory. So this means that the living entity is glorious. There is there is a gloriousness to the identity of the living entity. And, we actually often don't feel so glorious. Most of the time, many of us, we just might not feel very glorious at all. And, there's nothing glorious about our neighbour either. We just don't feel so glorious. But this is who we really are. We are glorious, and we are designed to stand in our own glory. And in that purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada, he says that true independence is actually dependence on the Lord. And that is where the living entity becomes Ishvara, becomes Lord himself, not the Supreme Lord, not lording it over the material nature, but Lord in a sense of being part of, being in relationship with the Supreme Lord. The living entity also becomes Ishvara versus being subjugated by the material energy, by Maya. And, we see also in Shastra so many beautiful examples of the devotional creeper, that delicate, fragile plant that on its own, it can't survive on its own. It needs a strong trunk of a much more established tree on which it can grow higher and higher and stronger, ultimately producing incredible fruits and flowers. And, we are that devotional creeper. We are that dependent, living entity that is capable of so much beauty and growth. But ultimately, we can't do it on our own. We need to rely on that solid trunk. And that solid trunk can represent to us Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, and also Lord Krishna himself. So all these things, we need to rely on them to nurture us, to allow us to grow higher and higher and higher and produce the fruits that we were meant to bear. And, so ultimately it comes down to the fact that we're never independently. Independence is there, but it comes with dependence. And actually, the greater the degree of that dependence, the greater our independence becomes. Because ultimately, we are parts and parcels of the Lord. We are fragmental parts, and understanding and connecting with the Lord is actually understanding and being connected with ourselves. It's just a natural process. It's a natural flow-on effect. So there is no extra effort or endeavour required. It's just a matter of engaging in that abhidaya process, that cultivation of relationship, and then we become to understand ourselves in our full glory. And the wonderful thing is that once we know who is the Lord, our own identities are revealed to us. And this can occur when we progress through the different levels of devotional service. So it goes from general to specific. So initially, when we come to understand that the Lord is actually indeed the supreme being, the supreme living entity of all creation, then what happens is we naturally become humbled. And we understand that, I am servant of this, incredible personality that has no comparison. I'm actually a servant to him, because ultimately we are programmed to serve. This is our natural condition to serve. So most of the time we don't know who or what or how to serve. We have no idea. But when we come to that understanding, we understand I am a servant of the Lord. And already that in itself is a mammoth realization and takes us to incredible spiritual heights in itself. But it doesn't stop there. So once we've come to that realization, I am a servant, then what happens is gradually in time, when we follow the process, when we follow the instruction of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, when we engage with the devotees, what happens is, as we progress through those stages of devotional realization, we call from Shraddha to Prema, Shraddha being faith and Prema being the ultimate goal, which is love of the Lord, pure love of the Lord, then what happens is, even before we reach that pure love of God, which is the ultimate goal of life, even before we get there, what happens is that what is revealed to us is who we really are as eternal identities in the spiritual world. Like, who we are, what we look like, our name, our relationship, our specific, unique relationship with the Lord. All of this is revealed in time. And this is what, is just a natural progression of this already blissful engagement in relationship with God. And, we understand that there are 3 levels of devotees, broadly speaking, and we place them in categories. So one is a Kanishta Adhikari, who is at the beginning level, who is just starting to realise things. And then we have a Majjhima Adhikari, who is just at the next level of, development and has a broader understanding of what it means to be a devotee and be in relationship with the Lord. And then we have the Uttama Adhikari, who's the topmost devotee, who actually has profound levels of realisation about all these spiritual truths we've talked about. And, the Uttama Adhikari, one of the characteristics of an Uttama Adhikari is that he sees every living entity. So everything that grows, everything that shows signs of life, is actually seen by an Uttama Adhikari as a servant of the Lord. So the Uttama Adhikari doesn't make discriminations between, what someone looks like, what they said, what they did, what faults they may or may not have, what strengths they may or may not display. They don't make distinction on that. The only distinction they make is that, yes, this person is a devotee of the Lord. In fact, they are a greater devotee of the Lord than myself. So they deserve my respect and honour. And the thing is, what makes the Uttama Adhikari come to that realisation? And the thing is that the Uttama Adhikari sees everyone in their true spiritual identity because he sees himself. He's seen himself as that first. So he's actually come to that realisation of, I know who I am, and because of that, my vision is unobstructed. I can see who everyone else is also around me. And, because we know so often our vision, like our material vision, what we see, and also what we hear, what we experience, what we say, what we do, even our spiritual advancement actually is influenced by our consciousness. So wherever we're at in our development is going to influence the way we interact with the world and with each other. And, that's why the Uttama Adhikari, who is so elevated, actually sees everyone else as elevated because they understand that this is the true nature of the living entity. And, there's a very beautiful pastime. It's very beautiful. I'm going to mention it. It's very beautiful. In the Sri Krishna Bhavanamrita Mahakavya by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there is a beautiful pastime where Lord Krishna, is engaging in a dice game with Srimati Radharani, his eternal consort. And of course, as usual, Srimati Radharani, she wins, and Krishna loses. Now this time, what he loses to her is his Kaustuba gem, which is an incredible gem that only Krishna wears, and he wears it around his neck. So he loses this to Radharani. So she's sporting the necklace, and what happens? Krishna looks at her and he sees his reflection in this jewel and immediately becomes envious of his reflection in the jewel, because the reason being because the jewel and his reflection are seated so soundly on the chest of Sri Radharani, so intimately connected with her. And so in this way, I mean, it's not exactly a direct sort of analogy, but what happens is we see our true beauty, who we really are, reflected in the eyes of a pure devotee. So because they know who we really are, they're not influenced by, what we did, what we didn't do, what we said. They're not influenced. They just know who we really are. And what happens is we become inspired to be that, to become that. So whatever they see, we want to be that. We want to become that. And why was Srila Prabhupada so loved? This is why, because Srila Prabhupada saw in everybody who they really were, their true identities, and he didn't mess around with all the, the nonsense of, everyone's misdemeanors, and he focused on their true spiritual identities. And again, we hear in the Srimad Bhagavatam in a purport that there's this concept of oneness with the Lord. Now, there is a school of philosophers called the Mayavadis who actually don't understand the Lord as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In fact, their key desire is to be one with the Lord, actually to be the Lord. They want to be God. So they don't see God as someone, an individual who is actually the supreme individual. So they want to be God. But in the purport we hear, Srila Prabhupada says, no, devotees, we also have a oneness philosophy. We also have this oneness idea. But ours is different in a sense that it's the oneness of the mind and heart of the devotee with the Lord. So what happens is there's this oneness of purpose, of will, and that have you ever had to work in a team or in a group or anything like that? You know that when everyone is focused on the same goal and they have similar ideas, and they work together to with all their unique skills and talents, then the outcome is often very successful. Whereas if you had a group where everyone was just combating each other and challenging each other and fighting, then it makes life difficult. So in this way, it's like a team. We like in a team with the Lord when we engage our hearts and minds in His service. And the deeper we go into our relationship with Him, His will is actually revealed to us, and we actually naturally flow into the will and the heart and mind of the Lord. So we become one in purpose with the Lord. And, we have Shri Radha Gopinath here just, casting their merciful glance on us. And we know that by Srila Prabhupada's explanations that there is no difference between Sri Radha Gopinath here on our altar giving us darshan than the Supreme Personality of Godhead in His original form in Goloka Vrindavan. There is absolutely no difference. And he likens the deities on the altar as it's like a post box. So, if you put it through the post box or if you deliver it yourself at the post office, the message arrives at the same place every time. There's no diversion, there's no deviation. It's all going to the same place. So, we have the benefit here of Shri Radha Gopinath right in front of us. And the degree to which we engage ourselves in the process of, purification by engaging in the service of the Lord. And there are so many ways to do that. And that's another entire, lecture or discussion. But the key principles to remember are hearing about the glories of the Lord, and this can be done through coming to classes such as this and, reading the books of Srila Prabhupada. And also the other main way is by chanting the holy name, so the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So if we keep these things in mind and we focus on that, in that we make that the centre of our life, the centre from which everything else revolves, then to that extent, we can perceive the Lord. We can perceive him as who he really is. And then when we start to understand who he really is, then we get to know who we really are, and the whole thing just becomes dynamic, a very dynamic interaction and experience and relationship, and it's something very much to aspire to, because it is ultimately we're pleasure-seeking beings. I mean, that is our true spiritual nature, is that we are designed to be constantly in ecstasy and in pleasure. So when we're not, we know that we're a work in progress, but we just keep in mind the goal, and that this is what we need to strive for. So, you know, I mean, what I've said today, it's not been intended as a, treatise on selfishness or, but rather it's to recognise that there's something called spiritual self-serving. So it's knowing actually what is best for us, because most of the time that gets so confused, as evidenced by those examples, the smoking and the whiskey, and just to also remember that our satisfaction is a byproduct of the Lord's satisfaction. So it's just logic, really, ultimately. So so I might just leave it there. If anyone has any comments or questions, feel free. Yeah, Babaji.
Regarding the analogy you gave for medicine, often we hear the excuse that people use for medicine that it's generally when you take medicine that it has a time, place, circumstance in which you take medicine, and certain dosage you take medicine. So why is it that the holy name is analogous to medicine?
Because I guess, medicine is usually designed to rectify a health problem. So, all medicine ultimately, whether they achieve that aim or not, that's another thing. But ultimately the idea is that, someone is diseased and they need treatment. So they come for medicine. And, medicine in, Western medicine anyway has so many limitations in so many ways. And the analogy of the medicine is given not because it's analogous with the limitations of Western-style medication, but because of the purpose behind it. The purpose is to cure, to rectify, to remove malaise, to remove illness, to prevent disease. So all of these things, are achieved by the holy name, hence the analogy of the medicine. And, the thing is, because it's not limited by the sort of traditional understanding of medicine, that we go even beyond that. It has its own kind of sort of identity as a medicine in itself, and in that way, it's like the more one takes of it, the more one becomes cured and purified, and their lives improve in material and spiritual ways. So that's why it's given as the medical analogy, I guess. And time, place, and circumstance. Well, this is the time, this is the place, this is the circumstance, and this is what we've been given. So, that's the solution. Hare Krishna. Anyone else have a question? Yep. Okay, we might just leave it there. So, Shishirada Gopinath ki, Nantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki, Nitagora Premananda.